That's the beauty of when you're married to somebody that you can be vulnerable with, that you are safe with. Like, man, I am so passionate about making sure people marry the right people. Like,
talk about that.
Okay. So like, I wish that I had an engagement encounter weekend that broke up 50% of the couples. I'm like, if half of you are going to get divorced anyways, it's better 14 broken engagements than one broken marriage. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm like passionate about making sure, because marriage is so important. It can affect generations. Like, so many people, we just think it's our chemistry with this person. It's like, no, this affects your children, and it's going to affect their children. And obviously, I talk about the cycle of sin in a family. Like, we all know abuse continues, adultery, addiction, this all stuff just continues. We pass it down to our children, and it doesn't stop until someone's like, no, I don't want this. So it's like, for me, I think about my family tree, and like in my family tree, I have some horrific things. Like I have abuse, rape, addiction, adultery, pornography, all this stuff. And when I had my conversion in my Catholic, I was raised Catholic, but I was very lukewarm. And when I really fell in love with Jesus, I was like, this stops with me. I am not going to marry a man who cheats on me. I'm going to wait for a man who treats me with respect. I am going to wait for a man his goal is going to help get me to get to heaven. Yeah. Like, I don't want to marry a man who is addicted. And so like, I was like, I will wait however long it's going to take. I will wait till I'm 50. I don't care. Like, because I know it is so important. This is going to affect our children. And now thankfully the Lord brought me Bobby when I was 28, I think, but I've met two 50-year-old women who just got married, their first marriage, and they're like, I would have waited all over again. Because the other option is, what do? You grasp. Right. Yeah. You grasp because you're lonely. You grasp because you're afraid, and you marry. Like, not that Bobby and I are happy to break up people, but when people write me, they're like, I wrote a blog called The Devil Wants You to Settle in Your Relationship. And I had multiple people who were like, I broke up with my boyfriend after this. I'm like, great, awesome. Because I have I meet the children of these. I have the chaperone, like, I'll speak to teenagers about this kind of stuff, and the chaperones are the ones coming up to me being like, I wish I would have heard this when I was 18, because my husband just cheated on me with my best friend who's 20 years old, or whatever. Like, I wish I'd have known this, because marriage is supposed to be a foretaste of heaven, but it can be a foretaste of hell. I just think, like, when you marry somebody out of fear, when you're grasping, and not to say that it can't get better, but a priest once told me, when he said this to me, it changed a lot. He said to me, when he was in seminary, he realized there were 3 types of guys. He's like, there were those who were called by God to be priests. There were those who called themselves to the priesthood. And there were those who were called by Satan. And I was like, whoa. And I realized the same thing could be said about marriage. There are those who you can tell were called by the Lord in that marriage, like the fruits that come from that marriage. There are those who called themselves, and there are those who are called by Satan. Like, you think about abuse, like abusive situations, or where people marry somebody, they were coerced into a marriage, or whatever it is. But I am so passionate. Like, the Lord doesn't want us to be miserable. He wants us to bear the fruits of the Spirit, to bear the fruits of generosity, love, patience, kindness. And I feel like sometimes Catholics, I've heard this said, like, well, love is a choice, so just marry whoever. I'm like, that's terrible advice. Terrible. No. And the thing is, I've heard people say too, like, oh, once you get married, everything gets better. No, it gets worse.
Or everything gets, the volume goes up to 11. Everything gets exaggerated.
Everything gets exposed.
Yeah.
All the stuff, like, oh, my porn problem will go away when I get married. No, it's going to be exposed. All my wounds, like people who have childhood abuse, sexual abuse that they've never dealt with, that absolutely comes out in a marriage. And it's devastating to have to deal with it. And some people, even 10 years into marriage, are dealing with those, the stuff, the trauma that maybe they never dealt with. So I'm very passionate about, because it's hard for me when I give talks about the beauty of marriage, but then I have people who are married and they're like, well, what do I do? And I'm like, oh, you go to counseling, like, please, like, do whatever you can, go to therapy. But that's why I'm like, I feel like those who aren't married yet, I'm at least, maybe I can help you to make good decisions. And I imagine that's
really difficult for a, say, 25-year-old woman to hear you say that, when she thinks, easy for you to say, Jackie, like, you're married, this great guy, you got 4 kids. But I suppose you would say it would be better for either a man or a woman, because just like there are for lack of a better word, trashy guys. There are trashy women. Yes?
Yeah,
Right.
I know.
And
People how dare you say that? Yeah,
by trashy,
yes.
I don't mean irredeemable, but it seems to me that if you're going to say that there can be selfish, obnoxious, self-centered, egotistical men, then of course you can say the same thing of women,
Right.
and we shouldn't be marrying in that wounded place, or to the degree that it's possible not to. But I would imagine, like, what do you say to a woman who's 25 and... I mean, that's really cool that you had that self-confidence to say, I would rather be 50 and then get married.
Well, I say I would rather be single and happy in Jesus than miserable in a marriage.
Yeah.
I would. I absolutely would, because
yeah.
I've seen people in miserable marriages,
Yeah,
and I've seen the divorces, and I've
then
seen
I think my
the
sister just got married. Emma, she's 32. Like, that's quite late to get married, but thank God she got married now. Her husband's a wonderful, holy, good man, and she's a wonderful, holy, good woman. And thank God. I mean, I think there was probably times for many years where she thought, I guess I'm just never going to get married, you know?
Yeah. And well, I have friends in their late 30s. I have friends in their 40s who are still waiting. And they're still waiting. And I don't know what God's plan is for them, but I do know that I've had 50-year-old women come up to me and they're like, listen, I got married when I was 50 and I would have waited all over again. And personally, I absolutely believe, because I was a happy single person. So I really kind of think, like, if you're a miserable single person, you're going to be a miserable married person. Marriage isn't an idol. It's not going to fix all your problems, because people have this idea like, oh, once I get married, it'll all be fine. Like, no, it's not an idol.
Any married person.
Ask any married person and they will
grab them.
absolutely tell you, no, no, not that it gets worse, but it's just all exposed.
Yeah.
It's all exposed. All those insecurities, all that woundedness, it all comes out.
Up to the surface.
Oh, it all comes out if you haven't dealt with it. And so
we don't want to kind of like lead people into a state of inaction either, because they're so afraid. I mean,
right.
However much stuff you've had healed in your life, we're all on this journey. And so stuff continually comes to the surface, which is one of the most healing things about my marriage, is having a woman see my brokenness and my impatience and my lust and my selfishness and all that, and love me. Oh, wow, that's a healing thing. And I'm sure you'd say, Bobby, loving you.
Yes,
it's just,
because that's like now, it's like, the person's not your savior. They're not your therapist.
Right.
But there is a healing element to marriage because it's a sacrament. And the two are the ministers of the sacrament. So there is healing because it's Jesus's love. And how beautiful.
Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you liked, and if you loved, subscribe.